Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Hello, everyone. This is Meg Bouvier. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Experts. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 30 years of experience at NIH as a grantee, intramural researcher, staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your questions today about NIH grant writing. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So I apologize, you'll hear that I'm very congested today. I live in New England. It is cold and snowy here, and I am recovering from cold. So I'm a little congested today. So bear with me. So if you are attending live, just a reminder that you are in listen-only mode. So you can type in your questions into the Q&A box. Or any comments you have, you can put them in the chat box. You'll see that I've already put a URL there pertaining to today's little mini tutorial. If you're watching this as a recording, we are recording this on February 22nd, 2023. Everything that I say today is true to the best of my knowledge as of today, but things change quickly at NIH. So I always encourage people to double check with your program officer or the NIH website to make sure that everything that you need to know is still up to date and accurate. So in terms of what you should be viewing in the library right now, if you're working on a resubmission of any kind, your deadlines will be in March. The R01 resubmission deadline is March 5th. And then they continue from there. The resubmission for the R21, R03, and K are March 12th and 16th. So I would suggest if you're working on a resubmission to watch the Master the Resubmissions course. There's a lot of good information there. Everything from strategy, what you're allowed to do. Can you change institute? Can you change FOA? Can you change study section? Should it be a resubmission? That kind of strategy questions, to nuts and bolts stuff like how do I format the introduction page? So, or what do I do if I disagree with a comment? Things like that. If you are gearing up for a June or July submission, you probably want to watch Master the R Series Part 1 preparation, which talks all about going into the NIH Reporter website and checking out similar projects, how to approach the program officer to have a conversation about your project idea, getting feedback on your draft aims page, selecting an appropriate standing study section if it's going to go to one. So all of those prep steps would be appropriate for people who are hoping to apply for June or July. Let's see, updates at NIH. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we haven't discussed. You know that you're in Forms H. You know that preliminary data is still allowed as post-submission material for the time being. Probably most of you are now acquainted with the new data management policy. We have a tutorial on that in an old recording for AGE, and I believe that the person who gave that tutorial, Dr. Becky Miro, a friend of mine, will be a guest on the on AGE again very soon to give an update on that, talking about templates that NIH has released that I think people are finding very helpful to guide them, and the lingering questions about releasing information that hasn't been published yet, which is usually what people have the question about when it comes to the data management policy. Okay, so let's take a pause here and switch gears and go over to the tutorial. And feel free to start loading up the Q&A box with questions. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have on any topic related to NIH grantsmanship or grantsmanship in general. I do write to some private foundations on occasion And I have written to other federal agencies. I'm about to write a U58 to CDC, for example. So if people have questions about any kind of grantsmanship questions at all, feel free to start typing them into the Q&A box, and we will get to those after this very short mini tutorial. So I'm just going to do a quick screen share. Okay, so you guys should be able to see this Mike Lauer and Noni Burns update on simplifying review criteria, a request for information. So this has not happened yet, so I don't want people to panic. But NIH is probably going to be changing their scoring criteria a bit. It's not going to be a drastic change like we saw way back in like 2007-8, for those of you who have been around a while and remember the dramatic change in format and scoring criteria back then. It's not going to be anything like that. But there's been this process that in true federal fashion has been going on literally for years. So the URL for this particular blog post is in the chat box again. So there was a process by which NIH gathered information from the public about potentially changing the scoring criteria. And I have to say that probably the two main concerns that people have had and that CSR has been really upfront about wanting to address are lack of diversity in all of their study sections and input on scoring criteria and that sort of thing. And then kind of related to that, their efforts and various beta tests of different systems to make review anonymous so that it's disconnected from organization and researcher, to address the concern that one, a lot of NIH funding is going into a few hands, and two, that there needs to be more representation among NIH grantees. So this process started a really long time ago, years now, going back to, I think it was 2019 when they first put out a call for, a request for information from the scientific public about potential changes. So 900 people viewed that blog, and over 400 comments were received. And then 2 panels were formed, because NIH has to have lots of panels and things move really slowly because it's the federal government. And they came up with interim recommendations that were presented to the Center for Scientific Review Advisory Council and in a public forum in March. And there are all kinds of links here to access that information. Then the public weighed in on those and they kept refining them. We're pretty far down the pipeline at this point. So, and there's a widespread support for these changes in scoring criteria. So I'm pretty sure they're going to be implemented. If I had to guess, they'd be implemented for deadlines on or after January 25th, 2024. That's my guess, because that's how NIH works. They tend to roll out their big changes in calendar years like that. So if I had to guess, that's what I think is going to happen. So let's take a look at what these changes in scoring criteria are. So there is a move now to move to 3 factors. So factor 1 is going to be scored, and it's the importance of the research, significance, and innovation. Factor 2 is going to be rigor and feasibility, which is essentially like the approach. And that will also have a numeric score. Remember that the low numbers are good, high numbers are bad. And then factor 3 would be expertise and resources, which is kind of like what we used to call investigators and environment. Those will not be scored. It's going to be a binary system. So let's zoom in and look at those a little more closely. And these are just links from the page that I gave you the URL for. So if you click here, it'll go to this page. So factor 1, which will contain significance and innovation, The wording on these is slightly different than what we currently have for significance and innovation. It's a little more simplified. I think what they've done is really emphasize the fact that just because there isn't scientific innovation in the project that you're describing doesn't mean that it isn't worthwhile or of critical importance to the field. Sometimes using tried and true technology is the right answer. And in theory, even in our current system, technically an applicant is supposed to be able to get a poor score in innovation and still get funded, because sometimes the tried and true strategy is the best way to answer a scientific question. In practice, I don't think that always happens, even though that's what the instructions to the reviewers say, and it's what the instructions to the applicants say. I think they've really emphasized that point in this new factor one. So we'll see if that makes any difference. The template will be very similar to what's being used, where they talk about major score driving factors, strengths, weaknesses, and a minor point. That's language that's used in the current current summary statement, so that's not new. Factor 2 will be called rigor and feasibility, which is kind of like the current approach section. But one of the things that I really want to point out to you here is that you'll notice, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the actual SF 424 instructions for the approach, but they're pretty lengthy. And in my training, I bullet point them out, and there's like something like 15, 20 of them. Here, it's really dominated by rigor. That's the big change. It's just absolutely dominated by language concerning rigor. And before we move on to factor 3, because these are the two factors, 1 and 2 are going to be the scored criteria if they're adopted. One of the things that I would do with my application, if I were the one writing it, is that I would change the headers. So right now we have significance, innovation, and approach are the 3 main subheaders. I would change them to 2 main subheaders, one being importance of the research, and then maybe underneath that have a subheader for significance and innovation. And then B would be rigor and feasibility. And underneath that, I would have approach, rigor, and feasibility. So I'm a strong believer that when you design the outline of your grant application, and you should always use an easy to skim outline that's left margin justified to facilitate skimming, because these applications are skimmed, it should exactly match the scoring criteria, so that when reviewers are going through and marking up their sheet, they don't have to go hunting for what they're looking for. So factor 3 is not an individually scored criteria. This is what used to be expertise and resources. So this is just going to be binary. It's just going to be it's adequate, or we need more information. They need to do something else. That's all they're going to say about it. And although it's not individually scored, reviewers will be instructed to fold that information into the overall score. So I'm a little disappointed in this aspect of it, because it doesn't go so far as to do anonymous review. I know that CSR over the years has beta tested different versions of anonymous review, and it's very tricky, because it's one thing to look at the merit of a project as a standalone thing, but you really have to also understand whether the resources are adequate and whether the project is in the right hands. But once you do that, you introduce the potential for bias, whereby somebody more junior or other biases may come into play there. There might be less confidence on the part of the reviewers in terms of awarding something to that person. Hopefully the ESI funding advantage takes care of some of that. But anyway, I wanted people to be aware of this. There is a nice, in that original blog post, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a nice little infographic. They're not doing anything earth-shattering here. It's kind of funny to me that they spent years coming up with this. But anyway, be that as it may, I think these are very likely to be adopted. It is a nice refinement over the existing scoring criteria. It's not an overhaul by any stretch of the imagination, but there you have it. So anyway, let me see if any of these questions, we have a couple of questions in the box. Okay, one of them looks like it pertains to this tutorial, so I'm going to take that first. What is the expected timeline on these potential updates? When will they decide if they will adopt them, and when can we expect them to be put into play? So this is the federal government, so it will be a long timeline, and you will get tons and tons of notice. So they have not said for sure, and let me stop my screen share. They have not said for sure if they are going to adopt it. But I mean, if you read the tea leaves, I think they're almost certain to adopt it. It's already gone through many rounds of requesting information from the public, going through advisory panels that have come up with suggestions and interim suggestions and recommendations, and those have been vetted by the advisory council. They're in the process now where they've thrown it back to the scientific community in its near final form for a final round of vetting by the scientific community. This process has taken like 3 years. So I don't know the timeline for any of this, but if I were a betting gal, I would say that they will probably announce at the end of the summer or early fall that they are going to adopt it, and that they would roll it out for deadlines January 25th, 2024 and beyond. That's just a guess based on how past updates have gone. You'll get plenty of notice, and I will absolutely clobber you guys over the head with this notification before it actually happens. And I'll create new templates to show you what a revised outline might look like to reflect the new scoring criteria. So have no fear, you will get tons and tons and tons of notice on this, both from NIH and from me. Nothing in the federal government moves quickly. Everything moves at a snail's pace because of the level of accountability. Okay, so hopefully that answered that question. Let's move on to a couple of more. If we submit an ESI in June and multi-R01 A1 revision in July as a non-ESI, are they reviewed at the same time? So potentially they could, not only could they be, if they're going to the same study section, they might even be reviewed on the same day. I'm familiar with the scenario, and I can't remember if they're going to the same study section or not. But yeah, they June and July submissions are all cycle into their reviews around the same time. And for any given study section, typically they will review A0s and A1s at the same study section. So the timing would overlap. So I am guessing that your concern is that if your multi-R01, your multi-PI R01 resubmission is funded as a non-ESI, would you lose your ESI funding advantage for the other application? And I think you'd have to ask your program officer about that. I can't remember how that works if it's set in stone at the moment of upload, like you were an ESI at the moment of upload, and therefore it's reviewed as an ESI or not. You'd probably have to check with your program officer about that. I'm sure that's why you're asking. So if you are really dead set on putting those two applications in the same cycle, then double check with the program officer that if the multi-PI one is funded, if you would lose the ESI advantage on the A0, because my guess is you would want them both to have a shot at funding. So, okay, and then the second question is, in the alternative approaches, are we able to place figures here and discuss another way of tackling the issue or trying a different method? Are we able to place figures here? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking in the alternative. Oh, in the alternative approaches of the research strategy. Okay, I thought you meant an alternative approach to submitting those two simultaneously. So you're talking about in the approach section, potential problems and alternative approaches. That's what you're asking about. Are we able to place figures here and discuss another way of tackling the issue or trying a different method? Yeah, you can handle that however you want. And the more junior you are, probably the longer that section and more detailed that section should be. In general, I think for somebody who is a very experienced R01 applicant who has landed many R01s and cranked out tons of publications, they probably wouldn't need to, reviewers are going to have a little more confidence and take a little more on faith. And that particular PI might be able to say something a little more general and give less detail about what the alternative approach would be, because reviewers are going to have confidence that that person is going to know what to do if they run into a problem. As a junior person, somebody who's like an ESI, the more detail you can put into the potential problems and alternative strategies, the better. So yeah, you absolutely can put figures or a table in there. I mean, within reason, you probably don't want to go on for pages, but you could go on for a page, and definitely you could do tables and figures to make your case. So sorry, I have my cat is over here demanding attention. Okay, hopefully, Mohammed, that answered your question. Okay, another question here is, will a PI who does not have a previous T or K be at a disadvantage for a smaller R? Okay, this is a really good question, and I would throw in the F in there too. So there's always been some question. I get this question in various formats periodically. So some applicants move up through the ranks, so they might start with an F award, either as a pre or postdoc person, and then they might move on to like an institutional T or a mentored K award, and then they move up to the small format Rs, and then they get an R01. The conventional wisdom is that NIH does like when applicants do that. And I would say that part of the reason for that is that you have demonstrated within their system that you can successfully apply for funding at some smaller level, and then successfully execute that project on budget, meeting the goals that you laid out within that timeline, et cetera. But having said that, many successful applicants at the small format R and R01 level have never gotten any of those awards. So, you can demonstrate your ability to be successful on a smaller grant with other types of funding. It could be private foundation funding. It could be an institutional award. I mean, what I probably would not do is just go in and apply for an R level at NIH, having never applied for anything ever in your life. Reviewers will probably look askance upon that. Because you don't have a demonstrated track record of landing extramural funding and turning that funding into publications. So I wouldn't do that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an NIH F or T or K award before you move into the small format R series. You absolutely could demonstrate it with campus funding, private foundation funding, and that kind of thing. So I have a course in the library about building your biomedical funding portfolio, where I talk about the different strategies to kind of stair step up to the R level at NIH. And it definitely doesn't have to involve an F, a T, or a K. So hopefully that answered your question. I think that may be the only ones in the Q&A. So in the final few minutes, I'm going to review some of the questions I got from some of my NIH applicants during the week. So one was a very simple, where do I put the eligibility criteria? That was a very simple question that I got from a person. And these sorts of questions, I'm amazed at how they still persist. And I think it's because the instructions are not very clear on SF424. But SF424 says that your eligibility criteria, your inclusion-exclusion criteria on a human subjects project are supposed to go in human subject section 2.2 and not in the approach section of the research strategy. Having said that, in practice, what I find works best is if you put the key eligibility criteria in the approach section, and then parenthetically direct reviewers to section 2.2 for the exhaustive list. I find that that tends to be a better strategy than simply leaving it out of the approach section, because even though technically SF424 says don't put it there, it literally says do not put it in the research strategy, put it in section 2.2 of the human subject section. That's in practice, I don't find that that's quite right, that's not really how reviewers are handling that information. So put the key eligibility criteria, 2-3 different eligibility criteria, inclusion criteria in the research strategy, and then say for the exhaustive list, go to section 2.2. Okay, we have a few more that came in. Will a PI who does not have a previous, oh, we already answered that. Did you say you put the link in the chat to the website you showed? I don't see it. Let me see. So I'm going to grab it again, just in case it's not there. Okay, it says that it's to everybody, but maybe it didn't post because it was before everybody had logged on. So it should be there now. HTTPS nexus od.nih.gov. So take a look at that and see if you're seeing that. In relation to the ESI question, what about R01 versus DP2? A bit torn between the two. So for those who don't know, the DP2, let me back up a little bit. So this refers to innovation. It's essentially this person is asking a question related to innovation. So typically at NIH, one of the big criticisms they get is that they fund next logical steps research. However, there are 4 funding mechanisms out of the Office of the Director that are meant for like high risk, high reward research. And they're for different career stages. So sometimes they're for people who are like coming straight out of their postdoc. Some are for ESIs. Some are for more advanced level people. One of them is the DP2, and it's for the ESI folks. And I get tons of questions about whether or not somebody should do an R01 as an ESI, a DP2, and I'll throw in there, or the CATS. The CATS R01 is usually the third one. So my guess is if you haven't considered the CATS, add that to your list of 3. And it's $329, and my God, I could talk for hours on this. So I think what I want to do is, I don't know how time sensitive this question is, but those deadlines are not looming. The next R01 ESI deadline is June 5th. And the DP2, I believe, has a single deadline in September or late August or something. So this is not a time, I don't think it's a time sensitive question. And what I would like to do is tell you that I don't have a topic for our next ESI session. Yep, it's not time sensitive. I don't have a topic for our next ESI session, which I think is March 8th. Why don't I make it that? I actually built a comparison table that lists out the various points of the ESI R01, the CATS R01, and for those who don't know, that's KATZ, not CATS. It's named after a person, and the DP2, and why one might pick one or the other, which ones don't allow preliminary data, which ones are, like the CATS doesn't allow preliminary data, the DP2 is supposed to be like a high risk kind of situation, and the ESI R01 is a more conservative approach. But there's much more nuance to it, much more nuance to it. So I'm thrilled that you asked this question, because one of the things I was going to say is I don't have tutorial topics for the upcoming months. So if people would like to send me some topics, feel free to email me topics at megbouvier.com. But it looks like our March 8th topic is going to be a comparison of the funding opportunity announcements open to the ESIs. And I already built the table. I think it's an asset giveaway on the website right now, but I think I built it a year or two ago and it's been updated several times. So I will have that all set to go. So thank you for giving me that topic. So I believe that's it for us for today. So I will thank you all for attending. And I'll see you next time, and good luck with your grant writing. And next time we will talk about the FOAs open to our ESI investigators. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.